The desert erupted with gunfire as the National Guard patrolled dove for cover. Bullets tore through their vehicles, shattering windows and puncturing metal. Staff Sergeant Martinez pressed his back against a disabled Humvee, blood seeping from a wound in his shoulder. Around him, 6 guardsmen returned fire, their ammunition dwindling with each passing minute. "We've got at least 30 tangos on the ridge," Corporal Davis shouted over the deafening exchange. "They've got us zeroed." The cartel ambush had been carefully planned, the patrol lured into a narrow canyon where escape routes were limited and cover was sparse. From elevated positions on both sides, cartel gunmen unleashed a punishing barrage from military-grade weapons. If you believe in stories that celebrate bravery and honor, subscribe now and join us. There's plenty more heroism ahead. Command, this is Foxtrot 7. We are pinned down in Box Canyon. Grid coordinates Echo Charlie 435782. Multiple casualties. Requesting immediate assistance. Over. Martinez's voice cracked as he transmitted their desperate situation. The radio crackled with a response, but the words were drowned out by a new wave of gunfire as cartel reinforcements arrived in modified pickup trucks mounted with heavy machine guns. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. The air seemed to shimmer with heat as the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly. Sweat stung Martinez's eyes as he scanned the ridgeline, calculating their diminishing odds. The taste of dust and cordite filled his mouth. They needed a miracle. "How long until QREF arrives?" Private Wilson asked, wincing as he applied pressure to a leg wound. 30 minutes at best, Martinez replied grimly. They wouldn't last 5. A mile away, in a makeshift operations center, Major James Reynolds heard the distress call. His fingers tightened around his coffee cup as he processed the coordinates. Those were his people out there, guardsmen he trained personally. "Get me a direct line to Air Force Tactical Command," he said, voice deadly calm as he moved toward the communications station. The technicians exchanged glances. The requested channel was reserved for high-level military operations, not border security incidents. "Sir, protocol requires now." Reynolds cut him off, eyes locked on the tactical display showing the patrol's position. The single word carried the unmistakable authority of a man accustomed to battlefield decisions. Back in the canyon, Martinez heard the distinctive sound of approaching vehicles. More cartel reinforcements. He distributed their remaining ammunition, knowing it wouldn't be enough. "If anyone gets out of this, make sure they know we fought to the last," he told his team, his voice steady despite the dire circumstances. The radio suddenly crackled to life. "Foxtrot 7, this is Falcon. I need you to confirm exact position of enemy forces, over." Martinez recognized Major Reynolds' voice. "Sir, they've got us surrounded. Heavy concentration on the north ridge, secondary forces on the south slope, vehicles approaching from the east entrance." "Roger that. Mark your position with smoke, color green. Prepare for air support in 3 minutes." "Air support?" Martinez's mind raced. There weren't supposed to be any air assets assigned to their sector today. And even if there were, approval for armed intervention would require authorization from multiple command levels. "Sir, did you say air support?" The reply was immediate. "That's affirmative. Keep your heads down." Miles above them, unseen in the vast blue sky, something was happening. Something the cartel forces, with all their planning and intelligence, hadn't anticipated. A predator was circling, guided by a voice they couldn't hear, preparing to deliver a response they couldn't imagine. Martinez popped a green smoke grenade and tossed it clear of their position. As the distinctive emerald cloud billowed upward, he turned to his team. "Air support incoming. Hug the ground and don't move until I give the signal." The cartel forces, seeing the smoke, intensified their fire, determined to eliminate the patrol before help could arrive. They believed they held every advantage. They were wrong. Major Reynolds first noticed the black SUVs 3 days before the ambush. They appeared at irregular intervals along Highway 11, always with different license plates but identical tinted windows and aftermarket suspension systems. Trafficking vehicles often used that specific modification to handle heavy loads across rough terrain. The coincidence was too perfect, too deliberate. "You think they're testing our response times?" asked Lieutenant Collins, a fresh-faced officer who'd been assigned to Reynolds as part of the Guard's border security enhancement program. Reynolds lowered his binoculars, squinting against the harsh afternoon sun. "They're not testing. They're mapping." From their observation post on a rocky outcropping 2 miles north of the border, Reynolds had spent the past 6 hours documenting vehicle movements. His notebook contained precise times, directions, and vehicle descriptions, habits ingrained during countless surveillance operations in Afghanistan and Iraq. "Mapping what exactly?" Collins pressed. "Our blind spots." Reynolds pointed to a map spread across the hood of their unmarked truck. "Notice how they're concentrating on the areas between our known checkpoints. They're looking for gaps in our surveillance network." Reynolds traced a finger along the contour lines indicating the rugged terrain. Deep arroyos and twisted canyons created natural corridors invisible to standard monitoring systems. With his background in air-ground coordination, he recognized the challenges of maintaining surveillance continuity in such territory. "We need to adjust the patrol routes," he decided. "Randomize timings, at unpredictable observation points." Back at base, a converted ranch house serving as the Guard's forward operating position, Reynolds compiled his observations into a detailed report. The cartel had been unusually quiet for weeks, which veterans like him recognized as the calm before a storm. Something significant was brewing. Intelligence is tracking increased communications traffic across the border. Captain Ramirez informed him during their security briefing the following morning. Unlike many officers assigned to border duty, Ramirez had combat experience and took the cartel threat seriously. DA reports suggest a major shipment is planned, possibly including weapons. Reynolds studied the satellite imagery displayed on the secure terminal. "What about these structures?" He indicated a cluster of buildings 10 miles south of the border. "They weren't on last month's reconnaissance photos." "Officially, it's a new agricultural processing facility," Ramirez replied, skepticism evident in her tone. "Unofficially, our assets suggest it's a staging area for the Sinaloa splinter group that's been pushing into this territory." Reynolds zoomed in on the facility's details. "Those aren't loading docks for produce. They're vehicle bays, probably for equipment maintenance." His eyes narrowed as he spotted something else. "And that's not farm equipment. That's a communications array disguised as a water tower." His assessment was confirmed 2 days later when a Border Patrol intelligence officer arrived with intercepted communications. The translations were fragmentary but alarming. "They're using military-grade encryption," the agent explained, sliding a folder across the table. "We only caught these because they had to switch to backup systems during a power outage." Reynolds reviewed the transcripts, his concern deepening with each page. The communications included specific references to National Guard patrol patterns, vehicle specifications, and even personnel rotations. The cartel had infiltrated their operational security. "They're planning something big," Reynolds concluded. "And they're specifically targeting Guard units, not just Border Patrol." That evening, Reynolds contacted an old Air Force colleague now stationed at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Tucson. Their conversation was carefully worded and officially about coordination training, but both men understood the subtext. "Hypothetically," his friend said, "if a situation developed requiring immediate air support for a National Guard unit under fire, the approval chain could be expedited under Joint Operations Protocol 87 Delta." Reynolds made a note of the protocol number. "And hypothetically, what assets might be in regular rotation over the border region during the next week?" "Daily Reaper surveillance flights, plus we've got a pair of A-10s scheduled for training missions in the southern corridor, Tuesday through Friday." Reynolds thanked him and ended the call. He didn't expect to need such support, but combat had taught him to prepare for worst-case scenarios. The first actual engagement came at dawn the next day. A routine patrol discovered an unmanned drone crashed near one of their observation posts. The commercial-grade hexacopter had been modified with a high-resolution camera and directional microphone. They're gathering tactical intelligence, Reynolds explained to the assembled officers after examining the drone. This isn't about drug shipments anymore. This is battlefield preparation. Captain Ramirez authorized expanded reconnaissance missions, and Reynolds personally led a small team to investigate the canyon network identified in his earlier analysis. What they found confirmed his suspicions. Fresh tire tracks marked and used trails winding through the remote terrain. At 3 different locations, they discovered small solar-powered relay devices disguised as rocks, cartel communications equipment establishing a covert network. More disturbing were the carefully positioned spotting locations overlooking key patrol routes. Empty food wrappers, cigarette butts, and the distinctive pattern of boot prints revealed where observers had maintained extended surveillance of guard movements. These aren't random smuggling preparations, Reynolds told his team as they documented the evidence. This is a coordinated military-style operation. Staff Sergeant Martinez, who would later lead the ambush patrol, examined a hidden spotting post with professional interest. Whoever set this up has training. These positions give maximum visibility while maintaining concealment. Reynolds agreed. The cartel had always employed violence, but this level of tactical sophistication suggested something new, possibly former military personnel selling their expertise. Their discovery took on greater urgency when Border Patrol intercepted a group of civilians fleeing north. The family had abandoned their ranch 10 miles south of the border after witnessing a large convoy of armed men establishing positions in the area. Reynolds interviewed them personally. The father, a weathered man in his 60s who had lived his entire life in the borderlands, spoke with the clarity of someone accustomed to observing details. At least 40 men, maybe more, he reported. With trucks, not just pickups, but larger vehicles with covered backs. They had communications equipment, proper antennas, and weapons, military weapons, not hunting rifles. Did you hear any names or destinations mentioned? Reynolds asked. The man hesitated. They spoke of the Devil's Backbone. That's what we call the canyon system north of my land. They said it was the perfect place for an ambush. Reynolds felt a chill of recognition. The Devil's Backbone was precisely the area where National Guard patrols routinely passed during their surveillance routes. He immediately ordered all patrols to alter their patterns and maintain constant communication. Additional observation posts were established on high ground overlooking the canyon system, though limited personnel meant coverage remained incomplete. That night, thermal imaging from a Border Patrol helicopter captured multiple heat signatures moving north across the border. When interceptors were dispatched, they found nothing, the intruders seeming to vanish into the landscape. The cartel's knowledge of blind spots in their surveillance was proving devastatingly accurate. Reynolds spent hours reviewing patrol routes and communications protocols. The next morning, he presented Captain Ramirez with a comprehensive analysis. They're setting up for a major operation, he explained, pointing to a map marked with recent cartel sightings. All indicators suggest they're targeting our forces specifically, not just using this area for smuggling. What's their objective? Ramirez asked. We're a security presence, not an interdiction force. Why risk a direct confrontation with military personnel? Reynolds had considered this question carefully. Message sending. The cartels are fighting for control of this corridor. Demonstrating they can successfully attack National Guard troops would establish dominance and demoralize both us and rival organizations. Ramirez studied the evidence, then made her decision. I'm requesting additional assets and authorization for enhanced response protocols. While the request worked its way through bureaucratic channels, Reynolds focused on preparing the troops. He conducted impromptu training sessions on ambush response tactics and coordinated with the communications team to ensure all patrols had redundant contact methods. Sergeant Martinez's team was scheduled for a routine patrol through the canyon system the following day. Reynolds personally briefed them on the heightened threat level. "Maintain constant communication," he instructed. "If anything at all, seems unusual, report immediately and withdraw to safe territory." Martinez nodded, his expression serious. A former Marine before joining the Guard, he understood the gravity of the situation. "We'll keep our eyes open, sir." The patrol departed at 0700 hours the next morning, 2 Humvees with a total of 8 personnel, standard for a reconnaissance mission. Reynolds tracked their progress from the operations center, an uncomfortable feeling of apprehension growing as they approached the canyon system. Their first hourly check-in was routine. The second included mention of fresh tire tracks near the canyon entrance, but nothing definitive. The third check-in never came. Reynolds was already moving toward the communications station when the emergency call broke through, Martinez's voice tense with the unmistakable sounds of combat in the background. "Contact! Contact! Heavy fire from the ridgelines! We're taking casualties and need immediate assistance." In the operations center, Reynolds instantly shifted from advisor to combat controller. Years of training took over as he assessed available resources and communications channels. This was the ambush he'd feared, and he'd already prepared for this contingency. While Ramirez coordinated the ground quick reaction force, Reynolds established direct contact with Davis-Monthan Air Force Base. His former colleague had anticipated the request and expedited the authorization process. Protocol 87 Delta was activated without hesitation. "We have a Reaper already in your airspace and A-10S can divert from training in 5 minutes," the Air Force controller informed him. "Standing by for coordinates and situation report." Reynolds provided the precise location and known enemy positions. "I need immediate ISR from the Reaper and A-10S prepared for danger close support. I'll act as terminal controller." The response was immediate. "Copy all, Major. Assets inbound. Authentication code Sierra Tango 94 Echo." As Reynolds coordinated the air support that would arrive just in time to save the beleaguered patrol, he reflected grimly on the warning signs they'd observed over the past days. The cartel had planned meticulously, but they'd made one critical miscalculation. They hadn't expected to face a combat-experienced Air Force controller who'd spent years calling in precision airstrikes against Taliban and ISIS positions. They hadn't expected someone who could bring the full weight of American air power down on their carefully planned ambush. Most importantly, they hadn't expected Major James Falcon Reynolds, a man who'd built his career ensuring that no American forces under his protection ever fought without the decisive advantage of air superiority. As he dispatched the life-saving coordinates that would guide the approaching aircraft, Reynolds knew the cartel was about to learn a devastating lesson about the consequences of attacking American military personnel. The hunters were about to become the hunted. The operations center erupted into controlled chaos as Martinez's distress call came through. Screens displayed the patrol's last known position, blinking red against the topographical map of the canyon system. Major Reynolds moved with practiced efficiency, simultaneously processing tactical information while issuing precise commands. "QRF status?" he demanded, eyes never leaving the main display. 15 minutes out," Captain Ramirez replied, already coordinating the ground response team. "Helicopter support is spinning up but needs 20 minutes minimum." Reynolds knew the patrol wouldn't last that long. The transmission from Martinez had revealed the extent of the ambush. Multiple firing positions on elevated terrain, vehicular support, and at least 30 hostile combatants. The cartel had committed significant resources to this operation, suggesting an objective beyond mere harassment. "Patch me through to Martinez," Reynolds ordered, grabbing the secure headset. The connection crackled with static and gunfire. Foxtrot 7, this is Falcon. I need immediate situational assessment. Martinez's response came in bursts between gunfire. For wounded, too critical. We're pinned down in the center of the canyon. They have elevated positions on both ridges with heavy weapons. Vehicle escape routes are blocked. A pause then. We're not getting out of here without air support, sir. Roger that. Air assets inbound. Hold position and conserve ammunition. Reynolds turned to the communications officer. Get me direct line to Sentry 37. The designation referred to the Reaper drone already conducting surveillance in the border region. Within moments, the feed from the drone's cameras appeared on the main screen. The thermal imagery revealed the full scale of the ambush. Cartel forces had established multiple firing positions along both canyon ridges, with reinforcements arriving in vehicles at the eastern entrance. The National Guard patrol was surrounded, their heat signatures clustered behind their disabled vehicles in the center of the canyon floor. Zoom in on the northern ridge, Sector 4, Reynolds instructed, spotting what appeared to be crew-served weapons positions. The enhanced image confirmed his suspicion. The cartel had deployed heavy machine guns with prepared emplacements, indicating extensive pre-planning. Reynolds accessed the tactical communications network, entering the authentication codes provided by his Air Force contact. Thunder Ops, this is Falcon. Authentication Sierra Tango 94 Echo. Requesting immediate air support for troops in contact. There was a brief pause before a voice responded, professional, focused. Falcon, this is Thunder Ops. Authentication confirmed. A 10S are diverting to your location. Call sign Warthog One and 12, ETA 4 minutes. Reaper is already on station for ISR. Copy Thunder. I'm forwarding coordinates for immediate surveillance of target area. Reynolds's fingers flew across the keyboard as he transmitted the precise coordinates of the ambush site to the air assets. The display updated as the Reaper repositioned, providing enhanced imagery of the battlefield. As he coordinated the air response, Reynolds's mind flashed back to similar situations in Afghanistan: surrounded units, overwhelming enemy forces, the desperate need for immediate air support. During one particularly intense operation in the Karangal Valley, his forward team had been pinned down by Taliban fighters in nearly identical terrain. He'd called in A-10 strikes within 50 meters of friendly positions, the danger-close support turning a potential massacre into a successful extraction. The memory sharpened his focus. Reynolds studied the Reaper feed, identifying primary and secondary targets for the inbound aircraft. The cartel had established a command position on the northern ridge, a cluster of vehicles with communications equipment, and what appeared to be leadership figures coordinating the attack. Thunder Ops, I'm designating primary targets. Northern Ridge, Grid Echo Charlie 436783, multiple heavy weapons emplacements and command vehicles. Secondary targets on Southern Ridge, Grid Echo Charlie 436781, blocking forces and sniper positions. Copy all, Falcon. Warthog Flight has your coordinates and is standing by for your control. Reynolds turned to Captain Ramirez. I need to establish direct communication with the ground team. They'll need to mark their position and prepare for danger-close air support. Ramirez nodded. We've got a secure channel open. They can hear you now. Martinez, this is Reynolds. We have a 10S inbound, less than 3 minutes out. I need you to pop green smoke to mark your position, then get your people into the tightest cover possible. We're going to be conducting danger-close strikes. There was a pause before Martinez responded, his voice tense but controlled. Copy that, sir. Green smoke on your command. Reynolds continued. The primary approach will be from west to east. The A-10S will make their first run against the northern ridge positions. Be prepared for debris and keep your heads down until I give the all-clear. Understood. Martinez replied. We've got wounded under whatever cover we can manage. The rest of us are ready to provide suppressive fire if needed. Reynolds admired the sergeant's composure under fire, the mark of a professional. Conserve ammunition. The air support will handle this. Your job is to keep your people alive. On the display, Reynolds watched as the A-10 Warthogs approached the target area, their signatures appearing at the western edge of the map. He keyed his microphone, switching to the air support frequency. Warthog One and 1-2, this is Falcon. I have positive control of your flight and am cleared for Type 1 control. Friendlies marked with green smoke in Canyon Center. Targets are on both ridge lines, priority to Northern Ridge heavy weapons positions. The lead pilot's response was immediate. Falcon, Warthog One copies all. We have eyes on the smoke marker. Confirm danger close operations. Affirmative, danger close authorized. Friendlies are within 50 meters of target positions. There was a brief pause, the pilots processing the implications of such close proximity between friendly forces and targets. Copy danger close. We'll make this count. Warthog One is in hot from the west, target Northern Ridge. Reynolds switched back to Martinez's channel. Pop smoke now and take cover. Air support is seconds out. The Reaper feed showed a bright green plume rising from the guard position, quickly followed by increased fire from the cartel forces. They recognized the significance of the signal. Martinez's team would be enduring maximum fire until the aircraft arrived. Reynolds watched the A-10S approach on the tactical display, his mind automatically calculating attack angles and weapons effects. The minutes of waiting stretched into what felt like hours, though his combat experience told him it was merely seconds. Warthog One, cleared hot, he transmitted, giving the final authorization. One is hot, came the response. On the Reaper feed, Reynolds saw the lead A-10 dive toward the northern ridge. A heartbeat later, the distinctive sound of the aircraft's Gu-8 Avenger cannon, a noise like canvas ripping, came through the transmission from Martinez's position. The 30mm depleted uranium rounds tore through the cartel positions, destroying vehicles and emplacements in a devastating display of precision firepower. Guns, guns, guns! The pilot transmitted, confirming weapon employment. The effect was immediate and catastrophic for the cartel forces. The Reaper feed showed figures scattering from the northern positions, abandoning heavy weapons and vehicles as they sought escape from the air attack. Warthog 1-2, cleared hot on southern ridge targets, Reynolds directed, shifting focus to the second aircraft. 1-2, rolling in hot, the pilot confirmed. The second A-10 executed a similar attack run on the southern ridge, its cannon fire walking through cartel positions with mechanical precision. Reynolds watched as vehicle after vehicle erupted in flames, the thermal signatures of the occupants disappearing from the display. Martinez's voice came through, tense but controlled. Holy shit, sir! The entire ridgeline just disappeared. Status of your team? Reynolds asked, already planning the next phase. Still holding. 2 critical, 2 walking wounded. Enemy fire has dropped by at least 80%. Reynolds studied the Reaper feed, identifying remaining threat concentrations. We're not done yet. There's a group regrouping at the eastern canyon entrance. Looks like reinforcements with mounted weapons. He switched channels again. Warthog One, target vehicles at eastern canyon entrance, grid Echo Charlie 437783. Copy that, Falcon. One repositioning for attack run. The lead A-10 banked around for another approach, this time from east to west. Reynolds watched as the aircraft lined up on the cartel reinforcements attempting to establish a new firing position. One, cleared hot. One is hot. The cannon fire cut through the cartel vehicles like a scythe, the depleted uranium rounds capable of penetrating light armor with ease. The Reaper feed showed secondary explosions as ammunition and fuel tanks detonated, creating a wall of fire across the canyon entrance. The remaining cartel forces began a disorganized retreat, abandoning positions and equipment in their haste to escape the unexpected air attack. What had been planned as a carefully executed ambush of a National Guard patrol had transformed into a rout. "Martinez, situation report," Reynolds requested. "Enemy fire has almost completely ceased," came the reply. "We can see them withdrawing from both ridge lines. Whatever you did up there, it worked." Reynolds allowed himself a moment of satisfaction before focusing on the next priority. "What's the status of your wounded? Thompson and Ramirez need immediate evacuation. Rodriguez and Patel can wait for ground transport." Reynolds turned to Captain Ramirez. "We need medical evacuation priority. The area should be secure enough now for helicopter access." She nodded, already coordinating with the medical team. "Medevac is inbound, ETA 12 minutes. Reynolds returned to the air support channel. "Warthog One and 1-2, excellent work. Maintain overhead cover while we extract the wounded. Watch for any attempt by hostiles to regroup." "Copy that, Falcon. We've got plenty of loiter time and ammo if they're stupid enough to try again." With the immediate threat neutralized, Reynolds began to process the broader implications of what had just occurred. The National Guard had engaged in direct combat with cartel forces on U.S. soil, utilizing military aircraft in a close air support role. The political and jurisdictional questions would be complex and immediate. But those were concerns for later. Right now, his priority remained the safety of Martinez's team and the successful coordination of their evacuation. The Reaper continued to provide overwatch as the ground quick reaction force finally arrived at the canyon, securing the perimeter and preparing landing zones for the incoming medical helicopters. The A-10s maintained a protective orbit overhead, their presence ensuring no further attacks would threaten the rescue operation. Reynolds maintained constant communication with all elements, coordinating movements and providing updates as the situation evolved. When the medical helicopters arrived, he directed the A-10s to widen their patrol area, scanning for any signs of cartel forces regrouping. "Sir," one of the intelligence analysts called, highlighting a section of the Reaper feed. "We've got vehicle movement 10 kilometers south, heading toward the border." Reynolds studied the imagery, a convoy of at least 6 vehicles moving at high speed away from the ambush site. "That's their leadership extracting. Mark those vehicles and continue tracking. We'll want that intelligence for follow-up operations." While the immediate threat had been neutralized, Reynolds knew the broader conflict was far from over. The cartel would not accept such a decisive defeat without response. If anything, they would escalate, seeking revenge for their losses. As the wounded guardsmen were loaded onto the medevac helicopters, Reynolds received a transmission from Martinez. "Sir, I need to say this from my team, thank you. Without that air support, none of us would be going home today." Reynolds acknowledged the gratitude but felt a deeper concern growing. The ambush represented a significant escalation in cartel tactics, a direct, planned attack on U.S. military personnel. This wasn't a chance encounter or crossfire situation. It was a deliberate operation requiring extensive planning and resources. "Captain," he said, turning to Ramirez, "we need to prepare for follow-on operations. This wasn't an isolated incident." She nodded, understanding the implications. "I'll coordinate with Border Patrol and FBI to establish a joint intelligence cell. We need to identify the specific cartel faction responsible and track their movements." Reynolds agreed, but knew conventional law enforcement approaches might be insufficient against an adversary willing to employ military-style tactics against National Guard forces. The response would require a corresponding escalation in capabilities and authorities. As the operation transitioned from immediate combat to security and intelligence gathering, Reynolds found himself reflecting on the broader challenge they faced. The cartels had evolved from criminal organizations into something approaching insurgent forces, with territorial control, military equipment, and trained personnel willing to directly challenge U.S. authority. The successful air support operation had saved Martinez's team, but it also marked a new phase in the border security mission, one that blurred the lines between law enforcement, counter-narcotics operations, and military counterinsurgency. The implications would extend far beyond the tactical victory achieved today. Reynolds watched as the medical helicopters lifted off, carrying the wounded guardsmen to safety. The A-10s continued their protective orbit overhead, their presence a powerful symbol of the force that could be brought to bear when American personnel were threatened. The cartel had planned their ambush meticulously, leveraging superior numbers, prepared positions, and detailed intelligence on National Guard operations. What they hadn't counted on was facing an opponent with the training and authority to call in the kind of overwhelming air support that had been the American military's decisive advantage in conflicts around the world. As Reynolds coordinated the final phases of the operation, he knew the deeper challenge was just beginning. Today's victory would require careful management to prevent escalation while still maintaining the security of American forces and borderlands. The cartels had crossed the line, and the response, both immediate and long-term, would shape the nature of border security operations for years to come. The battle was won, but the war against cartel incursion had entered a new and more dangerous phase. Reynolds prepared himself for the challenges ahead, knowing that the skills that had saved lives today would be even more essential in the complex conflict to come. The sun had begun to set by the time Reynolds emerged from the marathon debriefing session, casting long shadows across the forward operating base. 3 hours of detailed questioning from a rapidly assembled panel of military officers, Border Patrol commanders, FBI agents, and Department of Homeland Security officials had left him mentally exhausted but resolute. The unprecedented nature of the day's events, National Guard forces engaging in direct combat with cartel elements on U.S. soil, employing close air support from military aircraft, had triggered immediate attention from Washington. Questions of jurisdiction, rules of engagement, and potential international repercussions dominated the discussion. Reynolds stepped outside, grateful for the momentary solitude. The desert air had cooled with the approaching evening, carrying the scent of dust and sage. In the distance, helicopters continued to ferry equipment and personnel to the ambush site, now designated a federal crime scene. "They're calling it the Box Canyon Incident," Captain Ramirez said, appearing beside him with 2 cups of coffee. She handed him one. "Apparently we've created quite the interagency situation." Reynolds accepted the coffee with a nod of thanks. "The politicians can figure out the jurisdictional mess. I'm more concerned about the wounded." "All stable. Thompson and Ramirez have been airlifted to the trauma center in Tucson. Doctors expect full recovery for both." She hesitated before adding, "The official casualty count is 4 wounded, no fatalities. Could have been much worse. Could have been a massacre," Reynolds thought but didn't say. Instead, he asked, "Any update on the cartel response?" "Intelligence is reporting significant movement across the border. They're pulling back their forces, at least temporarily. FBI believes they didn't expect such a decisive military response." Reynolds nodded. The cartels had grown accustomed to operating with near impunity in the borderlands, occasionally clashing with law enforcement, but rarely facing the kind of overwhelming force encountered today. The psychological impact of precision airstrikes would force them to reassess their operational approach. "We've been granted expanded authorities," Ramirez continued, lowering her voice despite the privacy of their location. "Joint Task Force approval came through during your debriefing. We're being authorized to maintain air assets in direct support of ground operations for the foreseeable future." The implication was clear. Higher authorities had recognized the escalation in cartel tactics and were responding in kind. The border conflict was entering a new phase. "I need to check on Martinez and his team," Reynolds said, finishing his coffee. The surviving members of the ambushed patrol had been returned to base for medical evaluation and debriefing. Reynolds found Martinez in the medical bay, his arm bandaged where a bullet had grazed his shoulder. The sergeant stood as Reynolds entered, but Reynolds waved him back to his seat. "At ease, Sergeant. You've earned some rest." Martinez's expression remained intense, his eyes displaying the hypervigilance common after combat. Sir, I need to thank you properly. What you did today was my job, Reynolds interrupted gently. Just like standing your ground against overwhelming odds was yours. Your team performed exceptionally under fire. Martinez nodded, accepting the professional acknowledgement. After a moment, he asked, Is it true what they're saying? That we're shifting to direct military engagement with the cartels? Reynolds chose his words carefully. We're adjusting our operational posture to meet the current threat level. The cartels crossed the line today. We're responding accordingly. Before Martinez could press further, a communications officer appeared at the doorway. Major Reynolds, sir. You're needed in the command center immediately. We're receiving new intelligence from the Reaper surveillance. Reynolds followed the officer to the operations center, now transformed into a joint command post with representatives from multiple agencies. The main display showed live feed from the Reaper drone, still patrolling the border region. Sir, we've identified the headquarters of the cartel cell responsible for today's attack. The intelligence officer reported, highlighting a compound approximately 15 miles south of the border. Thermal imaging shows significant activity, vehicles departing, personnel mobilizing. They appear to be evacuating the location. Reynolds studied the imagery. The compound was substantial, multiple buildings surrounded by a security perimeter, with vehicles and personnel moving in organized patterns. This wasn't a temporary smuggling camp but a permanent forward operating base for cartel operations. Do we have authorization to engage targets across the border? He asked, knowing the political sensitivities involved. The senior DHS official present responded, Negative. We're coordinating with Mexican authorities to address the location. Reynolds knew what that meant. By the time any action was approved through diplomatic channels, the site would be abandoned, its valuable intelligence lost. Sir, the drone operator called. We're tracking multiple SUVs departing the compound, heading north toward the border. Appears to be a leadership convoy. The thermal signatures of the vehicles were clear on the display, moving rapidly along a dirt road toward a known illegal crossing point. The FBI agent in charge exchanged glances with the military liaison. If they cross into U.S. territory, then they become a legitimate target under our expanded authorities. Reynolds completed the thought. The room fell silent as they watched the convoy approach the border. Reynolds's mind raced through the tactical options, already planning for potential engagement once the vehicles crossed into U.S. jurisdiction. Sir, the communications officer interrupted. We're receiving a priority transmission from Thunder Ops. Reynolds took the secure headset, recognizing the call sign of the Air Force Command Center coordinating their air support. Falcon, this is Thunder Actual. Came a voice with unmistakable authority. Be advised, we're reassigning air assets to your operational control effective immediately. 2 additional A-10S and a Reaper have been diverted to your AO. Reynolds processed the information. This level of support required authorization from the highest levels of command. Copy Thunder Actual. Request clarification on rules of engagement. ROE has been modified under Joint Special Security Directive 2217. You are authorized to engage hostile forces demonstrating clear intent to conduct cross-border operations against U.S. personnel or interests. Authentication Code Echo Whiskey 72 Bravo. Reynolds verified the authentication code against the daily security sheet. It was legitimate. He had been granted unprecedented authority to employ military assets against cartel forces showing hostile intent. Copy all Thunder Actual. Authentication confirmed. Reynolds turned to the assembled command team, aware of the momentous shift this represented. We've been granted expanded engagement authority. I'm assuming tactical control of air assets to intercept potential hostile forces approaching the border. No one objected. The Box Canyon ambush had changed the calculus of border operations. The cartels had escalated to direct military-style attacks on U.S. forces. The response would be proportionate. Reynolds activated the command center's tactical systems, establishing direct control over the assigned aircraft. Thunder Ops, this is Falcon. Requesting current positions of all assigned air assets. The display updated with the locations of the aircraft, 2 A-10s already on station from the earlier engagement, 2 additional A-10s inbound from Davis-Monthan, and a second Reaper drone providing expanded surveillance coverage. Reaper 2 maintained surveillance on the convoy approaching the border. A 10s establish holding pattern outside visual range. Will engage only if they cross into U.S. territory with clear hostile intent. As the team tracked the convoy's approach, Reynolds prepared for multiple contingencies. The cartel forces might be conducting a reconnaissance mission, testing border defenses after the day's confrontation. Alternatively, they could be planning a retaliatory strike, bringing additional forces and weapons to escalate the conflict. The thermal imagery from the Reaper provided detailed information on the convoy composition, 6 vehicles total, with the lead and trail vehicles showing the distinctive thermal signatures of mounted weapons. They're armed for combat operations, Reynolds observed, pointing out the weapon signatures to the intelligence officer. Those aren't smuggling vehicles. They're technical, improvised fighting vehicles. The DHS official nodded grimly. Consistent with reports we've been receiving about cartel militarization. They've been employing former military personnel as trainers and security specialists. The convoy paused approximately 1 kilometer from the border, deploying personnel in a security perimeter while 2 figures approached the boundary on foot. The Reaper's advanced optics zoomed in on their activity. They're checking for sensors or surveillance, Reynolds analyzed, recognizing the methodical sweep pattern. This is a military reconnaissance operation, not a smuggling run. The intelligence officer agreed. Their movements are too disciplined for standard cartel gunmen. These are trained operators. After several minutes, the figures returned to the convoy. 3 vehicles remained in position while the other 3 began moving toward the border crossing point. They're splitting their force, Reynolds noted. Half will cross while half provides overwatch from Mexican territory. The FBI agent frowned. Classic tactical approach, establishing a firebase to cover the maneuver element. Reynolds made his decision. This is a combat operation in progress. The convoy demonstrates clear hostile intent against U.S. interests, following today's attack on our forces. He keyed his microphone. Thunder Ops, requesting authorization to engage convoy vehicles approaching border crossing with demonstrated hostile intent. The response was immediate. Falcon, Thunder Ops. You have authorization to engage under modified ROE. Confirmed targets are displaying hostile intent and have established armed positions. Confirmed, Thunder. Armed vehicles with crew-served weapons established in tactical formation at border approach. Authorization granted. Engage at your discretion. Reynolds turned to the command team. I'm designating the 3 vehicles approaching the border as primary targets. We'll engage once they cross the boundary. No one objected. The evidence of hostile intent was clear, armed vehicles approaching U.S. territory in tactical formation, hours after a direct attack on National Guard forces. Reynolds returned to the tactical channel. Warthog flight, this is Falcon. Prepare to engage 3 vehicles once they cross the border. Weapons free on my command only. Copy, Falcon. Warthogs are ready, awaiting your command. The operations center fell silent as they watched the lead vehicles approach the border. The thermal imaging showed their steady progress across the invisible line that separated Mexico from the United States. They've crossed. The intelligence officer confirmed, marking the positions on the tactical display. All 3 vehicles now in U.S. territory, continuing north on heading 030. Reynolds made the call. Warthog 2-1. You are cleared hot on vehicles Alpha through Charlie, now in U.S. territory. Copy, cleared hot. Warthog 2-1 inbound. On the display, Reynolds watched as the A-10 approached from the north, invisible to the convoy in the gathering darkness. The aircraft's thermal signature showed its attack run, descending to optimal engagement altitude. Guns, guns, guns. The pilot transmitted, confirming weapon employment. The distinctive sound of the Gu-8 cannon wasn't audible in the operations center, but its effects were immediately visible on the thermal feed. The depleted uranium rounds tore through the lead vehicles with devastating precision, the 30mm projectiles designed to penetrate armored vehicles having catastrophic effects on the lightly armored SUVs. Secondary explosions indicated ammunition or fuel ignition as the vehicles were destroyed in rapid succession. The thermal signatures of their occupants diminished and disappeared. Direct hits on all three vehicles, the intelligence officer reported, professional detachment masking the gravity of what they were witnessing. No movement from targets. Reynolds shifted focus to the remaining vehicles still on the Mexican side of the border. Reaper 2, maintain surveillance on the support element. Monitor for any movement toward the border. The thermal feed showed frantic activity around the remaining vehicles as their occupants reacted to the destruction of their forward element. Rather than advancing, they began a rapid withdrawal, turning their vehicles and accelerating south, away from the border. They're retreating, the intelligence officer confirmed. Heading back toward the compound at high speed. Reynolds nodded, unsurprised. The cartel forces had expected to encounter border patrols or National Guard units similar to those they had ambushed earlier, not the overwhelming firepower of close air support. The psychological impact of precision airstrikes would be profound, disrupting their operational planning and forcing a reevaluation of cross-border tactics. Maintain surveillance but do not pursue across the border, Reynolds instructed. Track them to their destination and record all movement patterns. The expanded air presence would provide unprecedented intelligence on cartel movements in the border region, allowing for more effective interdiction operations in the coming days. More importantly, it would establish a new deterrent against direct attacks on U.S. forces. As the situation stabilized, Reynolds stepped away from the tactical console, processing the significance of what had just occurred. Within the span of a single day, the nature of border security operations had fundamentally changed. The use of military air assets against cartel forces represented an escalation that would have profound implications for the ongoing conflict. Captain Ramirez approached, her expression reflecting the gravity of the moment. The Joint Task Force commander is on the secure line. He's requesting a full briefing on today's operations. Reynolds nodded, preparing himself for the detailed explanation that would be required. The use of deadly force against cartel elements would draw intense scrutiny, despite the clear evidence of hostile intent. Tell him I'll be right there, he replied, taking a final look at the tactical display showing the retreating cartel vehicles. And Captain? Make sure all aircraft maintain their combat air patrol. I doubt they'll try again tonight, but I'm not taking chances with our people's safety. Ramirez acknowledged the order and departed to arrange the secure call. Reynolds remained for a moment, reflecting on how completely his role had transformed in a single day, from advisory National Guard officer to combat controller directing air strikes against hostile forces. The cartels had made a critical miscalculation in attacking U.S. military personnel. They had assessed the National Guard as a minimal threat, similar to the law enforcement agencies they routinely outgunned and outmaneuvered. What they hadn't counted on was facing an opponent with access to the full spectrum of American military capabilities. As Reynolds prepared for the briefing that would shape the future of border security operations, he knew the conflict had entered uncharted territory. The cartels would adapt their tactics, possibly escalating further in response to today's defeats. The challenge would be maintaining the delicate balance between effective deterrence and avoiding a full-scale military confrontation on the border. The one certainty was that the rules had changed. The Box Canyon ambush had demonstrated the cartel's willingness to directly engage U.S. military forces. The air strikes had demonstrated America's capacity and willingness to respond with overwhelming force. Whatever came next would unfold in this new reality, one where the line between law enforcement and military operations had blurred, and where the borderlands had become an active conflict zone requiring unprecedented measures to secure. Reynolds straightened his uniform and headed for the secure communications room. The day's events would require careful explanation and justification to commanders who would face difficult questions from political leaders. But the core reality was simple and undeniable. American forces had been attacked, and he had responded with the means available to ensure their survival. Everything else, the policy implications, jurisdictional questions, and diplomatic complications, was secondary to that fundamental fact. Reynolds had done what any military officer would do when their personnel were under attack. He had brought the full weight of available combat power to bear, ensuring that the ambushed National Guard patrol returned home alive. As he prepared to explain his decisions to the Joint Task Force commander, Reynolds felt absolute certainty in the correctness of his actions. The cartels had chosen this escalation. The response, while unprecedented in the context of border operations, was proportionate to the threat they now posed. The revelation was clear: the border conflict had evolved from a law enforcement challenge into something approaching a low-intensity military confrontation. America's response would need to evolve accordingly, with all the complexity and commitment that entailed. 1 week after the Box Canyon incident, the forward operating base had undergone a remarkable transformation. What had been a modest National Guard facility now resembled a joint military law enforcement command center, with expanded communications infrastructure, reinforced security perimeters, and a newly constructed helicopter pad accommodating a permanent quick reaction force. Major Reynolds stood at the edge of the base's observation platform, watching as a pair of A-10 Warthogs returned from their morning patrol along the border. The aircraft banked into a controlled descent toward the nearby airstrip that had been requisitioned for military use following the escalation in cartel activity. "Never thought I'd see Warthogs flying daily CAP missions over American soil," Captain Ramirez remarked, joining him at the railing. "Times change." Reynolds nodded. The past week had witnessed a fundamental shift in border security operations. Following the decisive airstrikes against cartel forces, Washington had authorized the formation of Joint Border Task Force Sentinel, combining elements of the National Guard, Border Patrol, DA, and FBI under a unified command structure with expanded authorities. More significantly, the task force had been granted ongoing air support from Air Force assets, establishing a permanent military presence in the border region. What had begun as Reynolds' emergency call for assistance during the ambush had evolved into a sustained operation with strategic implications. "Any movement from the cartel side?" Reynolds asked, accepting the situational report Ramirez offered. "They've pulled back their visible presence at least 20 miles from the border. Intelligence suggests they're restructuring their approach after the losses they sustained." She flipped to the second page of the report. DA informants report significant confusion within the cartel hierarchy. Apparently, they didn't believe we'd employ military air power against their forces. "They know better now," Reynolds said simply. The cartels had lost dozens of fighters in the Box Canyon ambush and subsequent air strike against the cross-border convoy. More importantly, they had lost the initiative and psychological advantage they had maintained for years through intimidation and superior firepower. For the first time, they faced an adversary capable of delivering overwhelming force with surgical precision. "Martinez is being released from the hospital today," Ramirez noted, changing the subject. "His team wants to arrange a proper welcome." Reynolds nodded. Staff Sergeant Martinez had become something of a symbol in the aftermath of the incident, the National Guard patrol leader who had held his position against overwhelming odds until air support arrived. The media had seized on the story, portraying the Box Canyon incident as a decisive American response to cartel aggression. "I'll speak with him privately first," Reynolds decided. He'll need guidance on handling the attention. Later that morning, Reynolds found Martinez sitting on the edge of his hospital bed, already dressed in his uniform despite the bandages still visible beneath his collar. The sergeant started to stand when Reynolds entered, but Reynolds waved him back down. "The doctors tell me you're making an excellent recovery," Reynolds said, taking a seat in the visitor's chair. Martinez nodded. "Ready to get back to work, sir. The team needs me." Reynolds studied the young sergeant, recognizing the intensity in his eyes that came from combat experience, the subtle hypervigilance common to those who had faced death in close proximity. The Box Canyon ambush had changed Martinez, just as it had changed the entire nature of their mission. "Your team performed exceptionally," Reynolds acknowledged. "But before you return to duty, there are some things you should understand about how our operation has evolved." Over the next 20 minutes, Reynolds briefed Martinez on the formation of the Joint Task Force, the expanded rules of engagement, and the increased intelligence resources now available. The sergeant listened intently, occasionally asking pointed questions that demonstrated his tactical awareness. "So we're essentially on a war footing," Martinez observed when Reynolds finished his explanation. "Not officially," Reynolds clarified. "Officially, we're conducting enhanced border security operations under a joint federal framework. But operationally," he left the sentence unfinished, knowing Martinez understood the reality. "The cartels won't back down permanently," Martinez said, stating what both men knew to be true. "They have too much money and power invested in these smuggling routes. They'll adapt, try new approaches." Reynolds nodded. "That's why we're transforming our approach as well. Your team will receive additional training in advanced small unit tactics and coordination with air assets. We're essentially creating specialized units capable of operating in this new environment." The conversation shifted to practical matters, training schedules, equipment upgrades, and the integration of National Guard units with federal agencies. Martinez absorbed the information with professional interest, clearly eager to rejoin his team and implement the new protocols. As Reynolds prepared to leave, Martinez asked the question that had clearly been on his mind throughout the discussion. "Did we change something permanent here, sir? Or is this just a temporary response that will fade when the political attention moves elsewhere?" It was the question Reynolds had been asking himself since the incident. The history of border security operations was littered with temporary surges of resources and attention that gradually diminished as political priorities shifted. Would the Box Canyon incident prove different? "I believe this is a genuine transformation in our approach," Reynolds answered carefully. "The cartels crossed a line they can't uncross. They directly targeted American military personnel with a coordinated attack on U.S. soil. That changes the calculus at the highest levels." Martinez seemed satisfied with the response. As Reynolds departed, he noticed the sergeant already reviewing the operational briefing materials, preparing to assume his leadership role in the transformed security environment. By late afternoon, Reynolds had returned to the operations center, where the task force commanders were assembled for the daily intelligence briefing. The main display showed surveillance imagery from multiple sources, Reaper drones, reconnaissance aircraft, and border sensor networks providing unprecedented awareness of movement patterns in the region. "We're tracking significant changes in cartel operational structures," the DA liaison reported, highlighting several locations south of the border. "They're abandoning fixed facilities within 50 miles of the border, transitioning to more mobile and distributed operations." The FBI representative added, "Their communications patterns have changed dramatically as well. They've gone almost completely silent on previously monitored channels, likely assuming we've enhanced our interception capabilities." Reynolds studied the intelligence assessment. The cartels were adapting, as expected, moving away from the quasi-military approach that had proven disastrous against American air power, returning to the asymmetric tactics that had served them well in the past. "They're not retreating, they're reorganizing," he observed. We should expect them to probe our defenses, testing the new security framework to identify vulnerabilities. The assembled commanders nodded in agreement. The initial victory had provided breathing room, but the conflict was evolving rather than concluding. As the meeting adjourned, the task force commander, Colonel Harrington, asked Reynolds to remain behind for a private discussion. Washington is pleased with the results so far, Harrington began once they were alone. The President has authorized the continuation of the expanded air support mission through the end of the fiscal year, with options for extension. Reynolds acknowledged the information with a nod. And the rules of engagement? Unchanged from what you established during the incident. We maintain authorization to employ air assets against demonstrated hostile threats. Harrington studied Reynolds carefully before continuing. Your actions established the precedent that's shaping our entire approach now. Not everyone in Washington was comfortable with that level of force being deployed in a border security context. Reynolds understood the implication. His decision to call in airstrikes against cartel forces had forced a fundamental re-examination of how the United States approached the increasingly militarized threat along its southern border. The cartels made their choice when they decided to target our personnel with military-style tactics. Reynolds replied simply. We responded appropriately to the threat level they presented. Harrington nodded. I agree. And so does the current administration, regardless of the diplomatic complications it creates with Mexico. But I want you to understand something. This transformation we're implementing, it isn't temporary. We're establishing a new operational paradigm for border security, one that recognizes the reality that we're facing an adversary with military capabilities and intentions. The statement confirmed what Reynolds had told Martinez earlier. The Box Canyon incident had indeed marked a permanent shift in approach. The cartels had escalated beyond what conventional law enforcement could effectively counter, and the response had evolved accordingly. As Reynolds left the operations center and walked across the base, he observed the visible signs of this transformation everywhere: increased security measures, enhanced communications equipment, and the unmistakable presence of military aircraft maintaining constant patrols along the border. The National Guard personnel he passed seemed different as well, their bearing reflecting a heightened sense of purpose and professionalism. They had always taken their mission seriously, but the ambush and subsequent response had crystallized their understanding of the stakes involved. What had begun as a routine border security assignment had evolved into something approaching a counterinsurgency operation. Reynolds, drawing on his experience in multiple overseas deployments, recognized the pattern: an adversary that blended criminal and military characteristics, challenging conventional security frameworks and requiring adaptive responses. The Box Canyon incident had revealed both the threat and the most effective response. American air power, precisely applied in support of ground forces, had proven decisive against cartel aggression. That lesson would shape border security operations for years to come. As the sun set over the desert, Reynolds watched another pair of A-10s launch for the evening patrol. Their presence represented more than just military firepower. They symbolized America's commitment to defending its personnel and territory against an evolving threat that had grown beyond traditional law enforcement solutions. The transformation was complete. What remained was the sustained implementation of the new approach, maintaining the vigilance, adaptability, and resolve that had turned a potential tragedy into a decisive victory. 1 month after the Box Canyon incident, Major Reynolds stood on the hillside overlooking the ambush site. The desert had already begun reclaiming the battlefield, wind and sand gradually erasing the physical evidence of the confrontation that had transformed border security operations. Below, a small ceremony was concluding. The National Guard had installed a modest memorial marker commemorating the event and honoring the wounded personnel. No speeches or grandstanding, just a simple acknowledgement of service and sacrifice. Martinez stood with his team, now fully recovered and leading enhanced training for other Guard units. The sergeant had emerged as a natural instructor, his first-hand experience proving invaluable in preparing others for the evolving threat environment. "Quite the view," Colonel Harrington remarked, joining Reynolds on the overlook. "Hard to believe it's been only a month." Reynolds nodded. In the weeks following the incident, cartel incursions had decreased by nearly 70%. The persistent presence of air patrols had established a powerful deterrent, forcing the cartels to abandon their more aggressive tactics in favor of less direct approaches. "They'll adapt eventually," Reynolds noted. "Find new methods, new routes." "Of course they will," Harrington agreed. "But they won't forget what happened here. The rules have changed, and they know it." The transformation extended beyond tactical operations. News of the Box Canyon incident had rippled through Washington and border communities alike, catalyzing a broader reassessment of how America secured its southern boundary. The successful integration of military and law enforcement capabilities had established a template now being implemented across multiple sectors. As the small group below dispersed, Reynolds reflected on the broader significance of what had occurred. The cartel's defeat was undeniable, a clear message sent and received. Though some questioned the extent of the military response, most celebrated the powerful statement made: America would not bow to intimidation or aggression, regardless of the source. Martinez looked up, spotting Reynolds on the overlook. The sergeant offered a simple, respectful nod, a gesture between professionals who understood what had been accomplished and what remained to be done. Reynolds returned the acknowledgement, recognizing the bond forged through shared purpose and resolved action. As Reynolds and Harrington turned to leave, the distinctive sound of A-10's passing overhead drew their attention skyward. The aircraft continued their vigilant patrol, their presence now a familiar and reassuring constant along the border. Major James Falcon Reynolds, humble yet firm in his convictions, would continue coordinating these operations without fanfare or public recognition, steadfast in the moral clarity of his mission. His actions, and those of the personnel under his guidance, stood as a testament to an enduring American truth, that genuine strength lies not in aggression but in preparedness, resolve, and the unwavering commitment to justice and liberty for all. What do you think about this incredible stand? Do you believe strength alone guarantees justice, or does real power lie in partnership, strategy, and bravery? Share your perspective in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe for more gripping real-life stories of courage in the face of overwhelming odds.